So, welcome everybody to this session on, this is a discussion of CAT 2019 VARC, the second slot, right? So, before beginning with the discussion, let me quickly tell you something about this year's CAT 2019 in the English section, right? So, both the slots, the questions were much more difficult, if not much more, in fact, more difficult than what has been happening in the last 3-4 years. First observation. Second observation is that this is something which is not new, but the second observation is that most of the passages, in fact, almost all the passages, they were basically set in the Western world. So the kind of idioms, the kind of references used, they would be all American and European. So that is something which will add to the difficulty. Third thing is, many of the questions, even in the RC section, many of the questions, they were parallel to critical reasoning, right? So if somebody has been practicing critical reasoning of the level of GMAT or LSAT, right, it would definitely, that person would definitely stand to benefit from that preparation as far as CAT 2019 is concerned, right? So this could probably also be a way forward. So we should be accustomed, we should be planning to get ourselves accustomed to the Western, especially American style of writing, right? And secondly, we should be very familiar with critical reasoning kind of questions, right? So without wasting much of a time, let me show you the first question. By the way, again in this slot, we had 5 passages with 5 passages with 24 questions, meaning 4 passages with 5 questions each and 1 passage with 4 questions. That makes it 24, and the remaining 10 questions were spread between type in the options, parajumbles, that is, finding the odd one out, right, and the summary based question. So that is what I will do. I will pick up each of the questions one by one and discuss it with you thoroughly, right? So the first passage was this. Now, if I show you the first passage contains 5 questions, right? So this passage is nothing else but, if I summarize, it's about nothing else but how nowadays all across the world people are thinking of decentralizing bureaucracy. In short, decentralizing bureaucracy meaning how many countries are experimenting with spreading out the bureaucratic system all across the country rather than confining it in cities or important places. And the advantages and also some disadvantages, but the main focus is on the advantages of this, of this particular step. So if I know this, I should be able to answer the question. I mean, if I remember the passage more or less like that, I should be able to answer that question, right? Now, let's look at the first question. The long pedigree of the aim to shift civil servants to improve their living standards implies that this move. So this is one of the easiest questions. The long pedigree, the word long itself means something which has been going on for long, and we know that the question is basically about shifting civil servants to improve their living standards. Now, if you want, you can refer to the part again to make it clearer, but if you have read the passage, you should remember this is something which is, this is something which you will find in this line. The first aim has a long pedigree. After the Second World War, Britain moved thousands of civil servants to agreeable country towns as London was rebuilt, right? So this is one of the aims, right, to improve the living conditions. And the example given is after the Second World War, this is something which took place, which means it is something which is rooted in the past. The word long means, happening for long. Pedigree means having an ancestry, right? So that means the best answer here is 1, right? So this is the easiest question of them all, right? This is the easiest, right? So I would say, but relatively easiest, right? But relatively compared to the others, it's the easiest. But by itself, if you miss out that reference, you will not be able to get the answer, right? So direct question, something which we can answer, which we should not be getting. Next question, the dilemma. The dilemma mentioned in the passage, this also is directly referred to in the passage. Now, what is that dilemma? If I read that particular part, the part which I'm going to show you, the answer to this question is nothing else but a paraphrase of that, right? So I'll show you that part. What is that dilemma, right? So if you notice, the third dilemma is the dilemma is mentioned here. Right, if you look at it, the dilemma is obvious. It is mentioned here. Right. So what is the dilemma? Look at this entire sentence. So what is it? If you pick small and poor towns, right, now it will lead to development, but it will be difficult to attract qualified workers. So if you pick small towns, if you spread your bureaucracy to small towns, right, there will be advantages as well as disadvantages, right? And if you opt for larger cities, now what will happen is there will be better qualified residents, you will see infrastructure better, but now it also has its downsides. So it's about, you have two options, right, and both the options has its own advantages and disadvantages. That's exactly why it is a dilemma. So the dilemma is between choosing, the dilemma is in choosing between remote places, far-flung areas, and centrally located cities, and both will have their own advantages and disadvantages. Now let's quickly look at the options and see. Starting, if we look at 4, concentrating on decongesting large areas. Now the focus is not decongesting, right? So eliminate that very easily, right? Now if I look at option 3, keeping government agencies in the larger city or moving them to a remote area with few amenities. This 3 might also come close. Government areas in the larger city with a good infrastructure or moving them to a remote area with few amenities. This might be attractive, but let's see if there's a better option than this. So 4 we had eliminated. What about 2? Encouraging. This is not at all relevant. Now compare 3 and 1. Relocating government agencies to boost growth in remote areas with poor amenities or to relatively larger cities with good amenities. If you notice, 1 is more complete than 3, right? See, keeping government agency in the larger city with good infrastructure. Now this tells you, if you notice, this is not a dilemma, or moving them to a remote area with few amenities. Now the amenities present only a part of the dilemma, right? Now a major, if you look at 1 covers the major, 1 covers both aspects, not just the advantages. It also covers when you say boosting growth in remote areas with poor amenities. So you have the advantage, you have the aim as well as the problem of 1 step, right? And relatively large cities with good amenities. Now, so at least 1 is more complete than 3. So this is more or less a question of choosing the more complete answer. So this is why 2 would be the better answer. So more complete than anything else. Okay, right. Let's look at the next question. Right. So according to the author, relocating government agencies has not always been a success for all the reasons except. So we are going to find out why relocating government agencies has not been a success, and whatever gives you a proper reason will not be the answer. So everything except the answer option, everything except the correct answer will tell you why relocation has not always been successful, right? So you are going to look at if I simplify matters, right, if you say why it has not been successful, it means you are going to look at the reasons of the failures. Whatever is not the reason of the failure will be the answer, because we have the word except. So let's see, right. Option 3, increased avenues of corruption away from the capital city. This is a directly stated thing. Now we will find that, look at this line where you say, the disadvantages of decentralization. What is it? That is the decentralization begets corruption. So that means this option can be eliminated. What was that option? Increase avenues of corruption. So this leads to corruption, right? So this is something which cannot be the answer, because it has it's a disadvantage of that. So I'll have to look for something which is not a disadvantage, right? Look at 3, the difficulty of attracting talented, well-skilled people in remote areas. This is something which is also directly stated here. What is it? If you look at it now, if you look at the dilemma, it says, it is hard to attract the most qualified workers where in small towns. So this is also a disadvantage of decentralizing, right? So I will have to look for something which is not a disadvantage. Okay, right. Now what is the next, right? If I look at Now option, this is something which can be done by elimination also, right? But if you notice, a rise in pollution levels and congestion in the new locations. Is this something which is even considered as an advantage or a disadvantage of relocating to decentralizing and relocating to smaller cities? Now, pollution level is something which the author does not even consider, right? He gives you various advantages and disadvantages of the of relocating. What you're going to look at is something which is not a disadvantage, right? So rise in pollution level and congestion is not mentioned in the list of disadvantages. So that is basically why we will have to be looking at that as the answer, right? So high staff losses as people may not be prepared to move to attrition rates, right? This is something which he mentions also. So the best answer here is 2. Hope it is clear, right? Let's look at the next question. Right, according to the passage, colonial powers located their capitals, right? So colonial powers located their capitals. Where did they locate their capitals? The answer to this is found in the first paragraph. I will tell you why, right? I'll explain. This is something which will be, it's an inference based on the interpretation of this line. The key here is this, that if you look at the second line, in the post-colonial fervor of the 20th century, coastal capitals picked by trade-focused empires were spurned for neutral ones. What does this line mean? Quickly, dekho. When I say post-colonial, it means right after the colonial era, right? Right after the colonial era, coastal capitals, right, which had been picked earlier for trade-focused empires, they were shifted to regionally neutral new ones, which basically means after this period of colonialism ended, people shifted the cities, the capital cities, from other places to new ones, right? So the relatively new ones. What were the other places? The other places were the earlier capitals. What was the reason for choosing the earlier capitals? By this trade-focused empires. So this is what is the clue that will give you the answer, right? If I interpret this idea very clearly, the answer is quite clear. So the answer should be, it is to promote their trading interest. So erstwhile, in the colonial empires, the erstwhile reason was to promote trading, right? Now, after the colonial era, people started choosing more neutral locations. So the question is asked about the reason behind the location of capitals in the colonial era. So answer the point accordingly. So the answer is 3. Hope all of you got the point. Okay, right. Now, let's look at the next thing. Okay, next question. People who support decentralizing central government functions are least likely to side. Okay, now, so I am going to, this is more or less, this is very much similar to, if you look at it, this is very much similar to critical reasoning. Even if I look at, question number 3, this is also close to, critical reasoning. So critical reasoning, the closest one to critical reasoning so far is question number 5. Let's see, right? So what are we going to look at? We are going to look at something. People who support decentralizing, so people who are supporters of this move to decentralize, right, they are least likely to side which of the following reasons, which means I am going to find out something which is not in favor of decentralizing. So in short, I should look at something which is not an advantage of decentralizing. Now, not an advantage can mean two things, right? Not an advantage can mean it is a disadvantage, right? Or it could be something which is not connected also, right? So the question here is something which is, they are least likely to cite which of the following reasons. So what is to support their views, what are they least likely to say? So they are least likely to say something which will not support their point. Not support their point can mean neutral or against also. So look at, keep both things in mind, and let's see how we should be looking at. Here you can eliminate. The answer option is also quite apparent, right? If I look at 4, it reduces expenses as infrastructure cost and salaries are lower. This is directly mentioned as one of the arguments that the proponents of decentralization would use. So eliminate 4, 3. Policy makers may benefit from fresh thinking in a new environment. this is something which you will not be able to eliminate if you are not very familiar with a certain idiomatic expression. I will show you that part and tell you how it is exactly option 3. Right, what is that? If you look at option, if you look at the part, there is this, line where, there is this line which says, one second, the trend, how information, one second, there is a word there is a line which will say wonks in the sticks, right? So there is this line where they will say wonks in the sticks. So that would be in the second paragraph. Where is it? Second paragraph. So there's no blank, that's why we could not see. Anyway, so this is the paragraph which we have to look at. Proponents, so supporters of people, proponents of decentralization, what would you say? It disperses the risk, right? This is one advantage. Second advantage is there. Wonks in the sticks will be inspired by new ideas that walled off capitals cannot conjure up. Now, if you do not know the meaning of this statement, you will not be able to eliminate option 3, right? What is wonk? It's a very Americanized kind of a word. A wonk is, it can have multiple meanings. It is basically used to mean somebody who is very studious and very minute, somebody who focuses on minute details. So it can be used in a derogatory manner, something like a geek. Right, but if I use it in terms of policy, if I use it in terms of government policy, it would mean somebody who is very minute, who is hardworking and studious. So that basically means you are speaking about people who are willing to work hard. And in the sticks is an idiom. In the sticks basically means in the countryside. So here, what are you saying about what you're saying is that if you place a hard-working person in the village, right, he will be inspired, right, rather than in the capital. So this means it's an advantage. Now, try to understand the meaning of this line with respect to option number 3, which I was telling you. What does option 3 says? What does option 3? Policy makers may benefit from fresh thinking in a new environment. This is exactly what the line which I was telling you, right? What did it say? Wonks and the sticks may be inspired by environment which are not from the walled capital. So wonk and a stick are basically those policy makers who are very studious, hardworking. They may benefit from fresh thinking connected to what happens in the countryside. So 3 can also be eliminated, right? So what was difficult to eliminate was option 3, which I've explained to you. Okay, now look at option 2. Now if you can also find this option, because option 2 is something which is not even connected to an advantage or a disadvantage. If you look at it, it could weaken the nexus between bureaucrats and media in the capital, right? So is this the reason? Is this one of the reasons which proponents of decentralization would use to support their view? It is not, because bureaucrats and media, if there's a nexus, first of all, is it a good thing or bad thing? We do not know. First of all, the passage does not mention bureaucrats and media. There's a nexus between them, and is it a good thing or a bad thing? It is not even commented on. So this is out of scope. So if it is out of scope, it will not be quoted by people to support their points, right? So people will quote something to support their points. I mean, when they quote that, it would be something which is parallel to their arguments, right? So I will not quote 2 things to support my point. One, a point that is opposite my point, or a point that is not relevant. So 2 is not relevant. So that is why this answer is 2. Hope it is clear to everybody, right? Let's look at the second passage. This was the most difficult passage, right? Especially in terms of the language. The setting is slightly connected to India, but this was not easy. If I quickly summarize, this passage is about how British colonial policy had to, shift, right? It started with some kind of it started with indifference, right? Now it started with indifference, but later, they were actually drawn by that arrogance to impose their policy, impose their modernity in India, and how their steps, every step of theirs to impose modernity was met with resistance. It was thought of as an external aggression kind of a thing, right? External imposition kind of a thing. So the language is not easy. But anyway, let's see what are the answers, right? Question number 6, let's see. Which of the following, if true, could be seen as supporting the arguments in the passage? Critical reasoning. This is nothing else but critical reasoning. So, and the key word here is except. If I miss except, I will get the answer wrong, right? So, I have to find out something which does not support the arguments in the passage. Meaning, it could be something which is against the arguments in the passage, or something which is irrelevant also, right? So, something which does not support means against or irrelevant. So, find any one. So, let's see. Right. Now, if I look at option 1, the introduction of capitalism in India was not through the transformation of feudalism has happened in Europe. This is something which is one of the ideas which is highlighted in the passage. Right. You will, if you want, I will show you that part where he mentions that feudalism . So, he mentions that feudalism in a particular part. I'll tell you. So, here the paragraphs are not properly divided. I will tell you which paragraph is this. Just a second. I'll tell you which paragraph is this. The paragraph is not, well demarcated here. Oh, okay. It's in the second paragraph, right? Second paragraph would be the last part of the second paragraph, right? So, in the last part of the second paragraph, somewhere after the, so the part which is in, which is in brackets. So, and in any case, historians have forcefully argued that what was okay. So, idea here is, the acceptance of modernity came to be connected with subjection. Look at this line. It says, if the modernity that was imposed by the Britishers, right, by the colonial powers, it was connected with subjection. Subjection meaning, you are conquered, you are subjects, and they are the masters, right? Now, as a first, however, it would imply that whatever was proposed to be built was something like European capitalism. And in any case, historians have argued that what it was to replace was not like feudalism. So, in Europe, feudalism was replaced by modernity, right? Now, in India, when the colonial masters tried to bring in modernity, the difference was that they were not, modernity replaced feudalism in Europe, right? But what modernity was going to replace in India was not the same as feudalism. So, this is what this line is, right? So, if you look at it, this is what exactly, this is what exactly option 1 is. The introduction of capitalism was not through the transformation of feudalism as happened in Europe. It was the transformation of something else which may not be feudalism. Look at 2. Throughout the history of colonial conquest, this is also stated in one part of the passage. If I read it out, in fact, you can see this, right? So, it's in the first paragraph, right? So, it's in the first paragraph, towards the middle of the first. I'll read it out for you, right? It says something like this, right? Particularly as some empirically inclined theorists of this generation consider the colonies a massive laboratory of utilitarian or other theoretical experiments, right? So, this is that part, second paragraph, right? If you want, I will show it to you, right? Second paragraph, the last part, right? So, utilitarian, second paragraph, not second paragraph, sorry, the first paragraph, right? The paragraph is not, properly, one second, sorry, first paragraph, the last part, right? So, unchecked arrogance, right? So, with care. So, it is not properly here, the paragraph, this is not the second paragraph, the paragraph placing is wrong, right? So, look at this is the first paragraph, but this modernity, one minute, utilitarian would be somewhere here, enlightenment, rationalism. So, it would be somewhere here. This is the problem here is, the paragraph has been divided, in a different way. So that is why. In fact, it's the first paragraph. First paragraph, the line which I read. This was, yes. This part. So empirically inclined theorists consider the colonies a massive laboratory of utility. So some kind of experimentation was given. This is basically this line, these 2-3 lines, right? So that passage was also there, right? So moving on, right? So 2 is also definitely there. What about 3? Modernity was imposed upon India by the British and therefore led to underdevelopment. This is the last paragraph, right? You will find it towards the last paragraph. Modernity has been imposed. That is something which we know, right? And in the last paragraph, I will read out the line for you. He says, what happened was the creation of a degenerate version of capitalism, right? What theorists called the development of underdevelopment. So what do you mean by the development of underdevelopment? It means underdevelopment was promoted rather than development. So that is basically what tells you that the answer cannot be 3, right? Now, if I look at 4, the change in British colonial policy was induced by resistance to modernity in Indian society. Towards the beginning of the first paragraph, right, it was given very clearly. The first paragraph, it was given, if you read it and you understand, that the change in the policy, first of all, they were aloof, right, but their arrogance, right, and their knowledge, knowing that, they would be marginalized, knowing that they have they have changed European, they have modernized European, what they call, society, right, that feeling could not, that feeling kept, made them, let's say, envision the imposition of change in the Indian society also, right? So the change was not induced by resistance. Resistance came afterwards, right? Resistance came afterwards. The change, only when the change happened, then the resistance would happen, right? So that is basically why we can say 4 is the answer, right? This was a very tedious question because all the 3 options which were correct, right, they were from different parts of the paragraph, right? And option 4 is something which is from the first paragraph. So this will be tedious unless and until you have the ability to recall data, you'll not be able to answer this question. So this was a very tedious question. Okay. Question number 6. Question number 7. All of the following statements about the British colonialism can be inferred from the basis of the first paragraph. So focus on the first paragraph. All of them which can be inferred, but which cannot be inferred. So here at least he has given you the first paragraph. So at least there is some, sense here. Okay, first paragraph, first option, allowed the treatment of colonies as experimental sites, something which we just read right now. Some of them, some theorists, they tried to experiment using utilitarian, ideas, right? Look at 2, was at least an outcome of Enlightenment rationalism. This is something which you can find in the first paragraph if I show you, right? For whatever the sense of strangeness, right? So they say the British colonial state represented the great conquering discourse of English Enlightenment rationalism entering India at its moment of greatest unchecked arrogance. So they had achieved something, they had achieved enlightenment in a different context, of course, and it was at this moment that they entered India. So that is what made them, that is what made them change from a policy of aloofness to trying to impose their modernity, right? So if you look at that, yes, colonialism, it was partly an outcome of English rationalism. We have just read about it. So this cannot be the answer because you have the word except. Look at 3. Faced resistance from existing structural forms of Indian modernity. This is a very tricky option, right? If you look at it, many of you will say, why this is wrong? It is wrong because of just one word. It is wrong because of just one word. Now, British colonialism, if you notice in the first paragraph, even if you read throughout, you will find that the resistance was basically, the resistance was from existing Indian structure. But was that Indian structure modernity? So the key problem is this word modernity. So I'll tell you frankly, this question I got wrong. I mean, I was very confused because I never focused on this word modernity. If I remove this word modernity, right, now this cannot be the answer, right? So what I was telling you was the answer which they gave, the official answer key is this, and this is correct, right? Because of this word modernity. right? So if you remove modernity, this also cannot be the answer. Right, so this is what we have to be careful about. So resistance was from existing structural forms in India, but those resisting structural forms were not modernity. So this is why 3 is the answer. So this is again a trick question. Right, so moving on, I hope all of you understood what I was trying to tell you. Right, let's look at the next question. Next question is 8. Right, so consequently, the colonial state could not settle for eminence at the cost of marginality. It began to take initiatives to introduce the logic of modernity into Indian society. This is where, in the first part of the paragraph, where he explains that shift in the policy. First of all, when they came in, they tried to remain aloof. They did not try to, impose a lot of changes in the society. They were aloof. Right, now after this, what happened? Right, consequently, they could not settle for eminence at the cost of marginality. Right, so if they stayed aloof, they would definitely have remained, in a higher cocoon. Right, but this would also have resulted in being marginalized. Right, so that is exactly why they started trying to impose their ideologies on the Indian society. Right, so let's see what should be the answer. If I look at option 1, the colonial enterprise was a costly one. It has got nothing to do with cost. Right, cost in terms of money. It is about, if you choose to remain aloof, you will probably maintain a so-called superior status, but you will also be marginalized. Now the best answer to that is what you find in option. The best answer to that would be what you find in option 4. The colonial state felt marginalized. That's basically what you mean by this marginality. Right, they felt marginality because of its own modernity. Therefore, it sought to address by bringing. So they thought, they were marginalized because of this difference. So in the beginning, they were aloof. Right, but later on, they were compelled to take it up. Partly because of this reason, because they felt marginalized. So that's the meaning of this line. Right, so this is a moderate difficulty level kind of a question. Let's look at 9. Which of the following observations is a valid conclusion to draw the author's statement that the logical structure of endogenous change does not apply here? Here, transformation agendas attack as an external force. If you have read the passage, you will know that this is towards the later part of the paragraph. I do not have the leeway of reading it again, but this is something which you can place in the context very easily. It is about how the kind of changes which were suggested, which were introduced, right, by the Britishers, they were met with resistance. Right, and a part of it is that this change was not endogenous. Endogenous basically means, endo means inside, gen basically means originating. So this change which they wanted to bring about in the Indian society did not originate from within India. Right, so therefore it was seen as an outside force trying to attack or trying to destroy. Right, so that's basically what that's the meaning. Right, if I look at it, the options, 1, colonized societies cannot be changed through logic. Then logic has nothing to do with it. It is basically the fact that the change was seen as an outside force. Right, so the answer which you can find is very clearly nothing else but this. When you use the word, it did not happen organically. Matlab, it did not happen from inside as a part of its own development, but it was seen as the changes were not seen as a part of the society's own development. It was seen as something that was imposed from outside. So this is the key. Did not happen organically, but was forced by colonial agendas. This is the answer exactly. Right, now Indian society is not endogamous. Right, it is endogamy and exogamy is about forming alliances and marriages, which is not related at all. Right, so again, option 2 is also not about logic. The answer is very clear cut. Right, okay, moving on. Next question. Now this question, this is about the flow of ideas. This is about the flow of ideas, right? And by the way, you can find the answer by looking at each and every word, or you can eliminate also. By the way, I'll tell you one thing. How did the passage end? The last paragraph was about, if I show you again, I'll show you if you want. The last paragraph, the last part says, right, what happened was the creation of a degenerate version of capitalism. Degenerate matlab a very bad version of capitalism. What early theory is called the development of underdeveloped. So development, so in the end what happened was underdevelopment was encouraged, right? So the ending idea should be underdevelopment, right? So eliminate whichever option says the opposite. So eliminate karke chalo. It does not end in capitalism, it does not end in development, it does not end in capitalism. The capitalism was not a positive thing. It was something which was, underdeveloped. The capitalism was basically a degenerate or a decadent form, which led to underdevelopment, right? So even if I choose to not write that capitalism and still say this capitalism led to underdevelopment, this would be the best answer, right? And by the way, the first paragraph was about how the colonial policy had to go through a shift. So if I simply confirm the first and the last, I can find the answer very easily, right? So eliminate. If I eliminate, the answer can be found very easily. But if I try to verify each and every point, will take me a lot of time, right? So I hope that answers your question. Next passage. Okay, now this is this passage, quickly to summarize it. This is about this is about how there's an alliance between a non-profit organization and Google, and this non-profit organization is has the rights to upload the historical photos of historical sites, right? And it is linked to Google. People can access it free, and they have the intention of making it universal, right, available universally. But the critics say something else, right? Critics, many of them, for example Dr. Wattrell, right? So the critics the critics say something else. What they say is that it is Google promoting itself, right? And also one of the major arguments against it would be that how it is about how the countries in which its monuments are situated, they do not have the copyright, right? The copyright is basically with the company, right, which owns this site. So that's basically what is the criticism. Let's see what's the answer, right? So which one is least likely to be used by the companies that digitally scan cultural sites? Okay, so it's basically like again very much like critical reasoning. Which of the when I say companies, I mean a company like CYARC. What is the name of that company? That is my company, CYARC, right? So CYARC is the company that digitally scans and ties up with Google to make the pictures available. So they will, which of these companies, what is the argument which they will not use? Meaning we will look for something which they will not use to defend themselves, right? So they will not use an argument to defend themselves. That would mean something that is opposite of their let's say something which is opposite of what would be something which would be the opposite of what is the benefits that they provide, or it could be something which is irrelevant also, right? So something which they are not likely to use. Let's see what should be the answer, right? Now if I look at option 4, it enables people who cannot physically visit these sites to experience them. This is an argument which they would use, because it would give these companies a very benign, a very good kind of an intention, right? So because it enables people to visit sites which they otherwise would not be able to, right? So 3, it helps preserve. So preservation, this is something which is, and this is to their advantage, so this will also be used by them to support themselves. 2, provides images free of cost to all users. It is not universal usage, so this is also an advantage which they would quote to protect themselves or to defend themselves. Now eliminate karke, the answer is 1. If I look at 1 can be verified also. It allows a large corporation to project itself as a protector of culture. This is something which would be an argument that would be used by the opposite party, right? The opposite party would say that a big company, a corporation like Google has been given the false job or the false image of the protector of culture, right? This would be what their opponents would use. So that's basically what they would not use to support themselves. Okay, so the best answer is 1, right? Let's look at the next one also. by digital colonialism. Critics of the SciArc Google project are referring to the fact that. So what do you mean by digital colonialism, right? If you notice, what do they mean by digital colonialism is what do they mean by digital colonialism is when you look at it throughout the, if I can, I'll show you that part. It is mentioned in the first part, but it is explained later on when you say so what is meant by cultural digital colonialism is nothing else but the fact that these people, this company, they own the copyrights. They own the copyrights, and the problem is that the copyrights of these places, of these monuments, right? It is not with the nations where the countries where these monuments are situated. Let's see options. Take right. So let's see. The scanning process can damage delicate frescoes and statues at the sites. Is it colonialism? No. Colonialism is basically when you conquer, if not physically conquer, when you basically subjugate, it could be, colonialism is a process which can be political, economical, social, cultural, right? So it could be any way of subjugating. So digital colonialism is when you try to put somebody down and keep somebody as your, when you become the master, right? So this is not at all relevant to that, right? Option 2, countries where the scan sites are located do not own the scan copyrights. This could lead to subjugation, because whatever belongs to the countries, whatever is situated in the countries, they do not have the scan copyrights. It is there in some other place. So the other place might exercise some authority, some kind of a power. So that is what we mean by digital colonialism. So the answer is 2. Right. Now, option 3. They have not shared the details of digitization. Not sharing the details of digitization is not at all colonialism, right? Now, the details of digitization basically means how is it digitized? It has got nothing to do with the use of the pictures per se. So that also can be eliminated, right? Now, option 4 is not colonialism. This is basically a sign of infringement on their rights, right? Which is different from colonialism. So that's what will make option 2 the answer. Okay, let's look at 30. Which of the following, if true, would most strongly invalidate Dr. Wattrell's objections? Right. So we are going to look at something which will prove Dr. Wattrell's objections wrong. So first of all, let's understand what are the objections of Dr. Wattrell. Right. So Dr. Wattrell's objections are something which you will find towards the second paragraph, right? When you say the paragraph which begins with critics, let me just show you that, right? So it begins here. So Ethan Wattrell, an archaeologist, right? He says that this project is just a way for Google to promote Google, right? So look at this part. He's not comfortable with the arrangement between SciArc and Google. It is just a way for Google to promote Google. And SciArc is also mentioned in the beginning as a non-profit. They project themselves as a non-profit organization, right? So where do you see that SciArc is projecting itself as a non-profit? You will find that towards the beginning, of the paragraph, of the passage, right? So it's arranged for okay. So this is the objection of Dr. Wattrell. So what should be which of the following will prove his objections wrong, right? So option 1, SciArc uploads his scanned images of archaeological sites onto museum websites. Now this, I will show you another part which we can look at it, right? If you notice, right, he also says Wattrell says his project just a way for Google to promote yourself. They want to make this, but actually it's about advertising. So this one of the things that he also mentions is these images belong to the site of a museum or educational institution. It is wrongly utilized, right? Now you can prove him wrong by looking at option 1, because one of his objections is that these images do not belong. There are many objections, right? One of the objections is that it does not belong to Google. It belongs to something like a educational institution or a museum, right? And option 1 says SciArc uploads his scanned images of archaeological sites onto museum websites only. If this is the case, then what Dr. Wottrell was fearing is misplaced. Right, so this is something which is the answer. So this is one of the things which Dr. Wottrell was objecting to, and it is invalidated, it is proved wrong now. Look at the others. Google takes down advertisements on its website hosting SciArc scanned images. Now, Google taking down its advertisement on its website hosting, so even if it takes down its own advertisement, right, what is the guarantee that Google is not promoting itself? It would be very clear and apparent that Google is basically behind it, even if they do not add their own advertisements, but the name Google would still feature, right? So it would be also clearly known that Google would, we do not know whether Google will remain anonymous, right? Taking down advertisements does not mean remaining anonymous. That's also something which we're not very sure about, right? Okay, there's a ban on Sky, so now 3 is not even relevant, right? Look at 4. SciArc does not own the copyright on scanned images of archaeological sites. Whether they own or do not own is not the point. Dr. Wottrell's objections are, it is something which is like a non-profit, a not-for-profit organization collaborating with a big company which is trying to promote itself and having access to something which should be available to a museum or an educational institute, right? So that is why the answer is 1. Look at 14. So in Thompson's view, SciArc owning the copyright of its digital scans of archaeological sites is akin to. Now, in Dr. Thompson's view, Dr. Thompson, where does Dr. Thompson feature? Now, Dr. Thompson is, if you notice, is of the idea that it is like, it is like digital colonialism, right? If you look at the, if you look at that part, Dr. Thompson comes towards the end. I'll read out the part where he says that Dr. Thompson, a professor, right, says it's the latest example of a Western nation appropriating a foreign culture and centuries-long battle. So Dr. Watson is saying it's the example. What is happening now is an example of a Western culture, Western nation appropriating. Appropriating basically means, illegitimately acquiring and keeping for itself, right? So that is the key, right? So if I look at it now, the answer options which we are going to look at will be like outside the paragraph but should be similar to the idea, right? So what should it, digital platforms capturing users data. Now, platforms capturing users data for market research, this is not something like this is not like a Western country appropriating something that belongs to another culture, right? So it is not about appropriation. It's basically about using a particular data for its own advantage. Different. If I look at 2, the seizing of ancient Egyptian artifacts by a Western museum. So a Western power appropriating a cultural property of another nation. That's exactly an example of what is given here. So 2 is the answer, right? You can eliminate the others very clearly, right? So, and option 4 is nothing else but an example of theft only, right? And option 3, uploading photos of monuments onto social media. Now, this may or may not be always a problem. This may or may not be an infringement. So the best answer is 2. Okay. Next question. Based on his views mentioned in the passage, one could best characterize Dr. Wottrell as being. So what is Dr. Wottrell? We know he is critical. So let's eliminate the options. We know he's critical, but there could be 1,000 ways of saying that. Let's see. Look at option 4 and eliminate. Uneasy about the marketing of archaeological images for commercial use by firms such as Google and SciArc. Now, uneasy, perfectly fine, but is it basically, does Google and SciArc market archaeological images for commercial use? No, they say that they provide it free. So this basically means this option can be eliminated, right? Look at 3, dismissive of lay people's access to this is when he says that, whatever image is available with Sayag and Google should be available to institutes or museums, does it mean that people do not have the right to it? No. In fact, he could very well mean that by giving it to a museum or an educational institute, it could be used for the common good. So this is also not this is not similar to what is given in 3. Right. Look at 2. Opposed to the use of digital technology in archaeology and culture. Now, is he opposed to digital technology, or is he basically a little bit, skeptical about how these two organizations are teaming up, and they are, one is promoting itself, right? So look at 1, critical about the link between SciArc is mentioned as a non-profit organization in the paragraph. You can find it towards the beginning. You will find it very easily there. And a commercial tech platform. This commercial tech platform is Google for distributing archaeological images. So this is this is the best way of summarizing it, his ideas, right? There could be other ways of putting it forth, right? But of these 4, this is the best way, right? And I found faults with the other 3 also. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Next passage, right? This passage was interesting. If you remember, this was more or less about how, by taking the example of Chinese salesmen selling lingerie in Egypt without in Egypt, a very conservative society, it does not cause any perturbance, it does not cause any disruptions, right? And then he moves on to the concept of how trying to learn a language and the difficulties associated with that, it might help you overcome many barriers, something which we associate only with a particular culture or a particular race, right? We might start understanding or breaking through it when we go through the rigors of learning language. So that's basically what the passage is about, right? Now, this is a example, this question, which way is Oriental? This is when the author, if you look at it, this is where he is which way is Oriental? This is basically when this is in the 4th paragraph, the last sentence. Which way is Oriental? So let's see, right? What does he mean when he said this? Which way is Oriental, right? So far he has spoken about whatever we discuss right now. So now he said that could be Oriental hardly captures the complexity of interactions. What exactly is the dynamic when a man from Missouri observes the Zhejiang native selling lingerie to an upper Egyptian woman? If all of us now stand beside the same river, speaking in ways we all understand, who's looking east and who's looking west, who is Oriental, which way is Oriental? So that basically means in that particular setting, right, these cultural differences, racial differences hardly matter, right? And that is basically because of the aspect of all of them trying to learn the same language or trying to assimilate the same culture which is connected to that language, right? So let's see what is the answer. Orientalism is a discourse of the past. It has got nothing to do with being the past, right? It is about blurring of distinctions. Or if I look at 2, globalization has mitigated cultural hierarchies. It is not globalization which has mitigated cultural hierarchies and barriers. It is the process of learning language which opens you to many cultures. So it is not 2. What about 3? Goodwill alone, it's not about goodwill, right? It's about how the process of learning language and the cultural associations, it breaks down barriers. This is basically what you find in option 4. Hope everybody is clear with this. Let's look at the next question. The author's critics would argue that, right? So if you look at the key summary of the author, what he's actually saying is, right, the process of learning a language, right, it will involve exposing oneself to cultural nuances, and this will help us to, to break down certain barriers. It will help us to better empathize other cultures. So this is the author's argument. The author's critics, meaning what will be the opposite of the author's arguments? Let's see. Start from 4. Empathy can overcome identity politics. Now, empathy can overcome identity politics is an argument which the author is likely to use himself, because if you empathize, right, you will start understanding what the other person goes through, which is connected to learning language. So this can overcome identity politics. This is something which the author himself may use, not his critics. Option 3, linguistic politics can be erased. Is the author speaking about linguistic politics, right? Or is it basically about identity, racial and cultural hierarchies? So linguistic politics can be erased, but again, by what? The main focus is the cultural nuances of learning language. So 3 can be eliminated. Orientalism cannot be practiced by Egyptians. The paragraph is not about Orientalism. Look at 1. Language is insufficient to bridge cultural value. The opposite of what the author is saying. Learning language will help you break down cultural hierarchies and cultural distinctions. So this is the opposite of what the author is saying. Language is insufficient to bridge cultural barriers. The opposite of what the author is saying. Right. So this is the answer. Look at 18th. Okay, application-based question. A French ethnographer to study the culture of a Nigerian type. Which of the following is most likely? So there's a French ethnographer. Ethnographer is somebody who does, somebody who studies. Ethnic means racial, right? So somebody who studies or traces, the various, racial, what do you call? Somebody who studies who studies various races, right? So he is trying to study the culture of a Nigerian type. So what is going to be the author of what is going to be the view of the author? So let's see, right? Let's eliminate and see. Option 1, the author would encourage the ethnographer. This part I agree. But next part, but ask him or mine to be mindful of his or her racial identity. Now, the second part is what is the problem? The author would say the racial and the gender identity in the process would be dissolved. So he would not be mindful of that. So second part is not agreeable. Second option, the author would encourage that this is okay and recommend him to hire now if you hire a translator, the purpose would be defeated. The author would like you to go through the cultural nuances, would like you to go through these various processes yourself. If you hire a translator, it would be lost in translation. So 2 are also eliminated because of the second part. Look at 3. The author would encourage the ethnographer, fine, right, but ask him or her to first learn the language of the Nigerian tribe he or she wishes to study, right? So this is something. So learning the language would basically help the person break down or go through the distinctions of culture, distinctions of that various, that particular tribe that he's trying to learn. So 3 is the answer. Okay. Now discourage, the fourth part you can straight away eliminate from the point. Discourage. Okay. Next question. So which of the following is not responsible for language's ability to change us? Now this is something which I can eliminate by I can answer by elimination. So what is not responsible for language's ability to change us? Meaning learning a certain language or exposure to a language has the ability to transform us, right? So and which is not the cause of that? Let's see. Right, if I look at option 2, the twists and turns in the evolution of language over time. Now, this is something which will not be a cause for learning language making us transformed, because evolution of language over time will only result in the language developing itself. How is it going to affect a person who is going to learn the language? It may or may not, right? Look at the other options. Language is intrinsic, if it is connected to our notions of self and identity, of course it is something which will be responsible. It will make us change these various notions when we learn a language. So 1 cannot be the answer. 3, ups and downs involved. This is definitely, the difficulties in the course of learning a language will be responsible for changing you. You will be transformed once you go through it. Right. 4, language's ability to mediate the impact of identity markers. 1 is born with. So this is also very similar to the concept of identity. So languages, the ability of language to mediate identity markers, 1 is born with. It means how it is connected with identity markers. So that will definitely influence you once you go through this process, right? So this is basically the answer is 2. Okay, last passage. The last passage quickly is a very surprising, passage. It is about how the author tells you there is a he calls them squatter cities. Squatter cities as in cities which are very congested, probably like slums. And he tells us that how surprisingly they are green. They have very, they have little impact on the environment, right? This is something which is surprising, right? And towards the end, right, so in the last part, he tells you just one paragraph, right, where he says, yes, they do have the negatives, but he says, despite the negatives, the positives far outweigh the negatives. So that's basically the paragraph. Let's look at the questions now. Okay, so according to the passage, squatter cities are environmental friendly for all of the following reasons except. So environmental friendly, you will find all the sentences itself, right? So they recycle material. Okay, so recycling material is basically connected to environmental friendliness, right? Sorting out garbage is definitely connected to environmental friendliness. Transportation is energy efficient, is also connected to environment friendly. But keeping the streets clean, cleanliness is something which may or may not impact the environment directly. All the other three we see have strong connections and clear-cut connections with its impact on the environment. But streets might be clean, right? But the cleanliness of the street may or may not have any positive or any negative impact on the environment, right? What I'm saying is, despite the streets being clean, the environmental can still be harmed because of other things. Despite the street being very unclean, the environment may not be impacted because of other factors, right? That's what we are discussing, right? So let's look at the next question. Right, so it can be inferred that cities are good places to live in for all the following reasons. So we will find all the answers very clearly, the things that the author lists as advantages of cities, right? So except we have to find out something which is not an advantage of living in a city. Very clear. Look at option 4. Cities have suburban areas as well as office areas. Demarcation into suburban areas and office area is not at all an advantage. It is just a feature. It is just a feature of, it could be a feature of cities. But this may or may not be an advantage. We are looking at something which is not an advantage. So not an advantage basically means it could be a disadvantage or it may not have an impact also. So again, critical reasoning. So the best answer is 4. All the other 3 will be advantages if you notice. Okay. Offer employment, definitely. Preventing this, they help prevent destruction of the environment. This is something which the author, tells you how it prevents or slows down destruction. That is his whole argument, right? Contribute to the cultural transformation of the residents. This is also mentioned directly in one part if you notice, right? So last sentence, they are transformative in the slums as well as the office towers and leafy suburbs. The progress is from hick to metropolitan to cosmopolitan. The meaning of the word hick basically means somebody from a villager. Right, so it basically means living in a city transforms. So this is also an advantage given by the author, right? So this is again, as I was telling you, an American idiom, an American expression. If I do not know what is hick, it will be difficult to understand. Okay. Next question, 22. In the context of the passage, the author refers to Manaus. So where does the author, when where he tells Manaus, he gives the examples of Manaus and says that there in Manaus they have come to this idea that they can. So what look at this part. The nationally subsidized city of Manaus answers the question of how to stop deforestation, give people proper jobs, and people would be cutting forests, would be cutting trees in forests. They would be busy working in cities, so it would help deforestation. So the example of Manaus was quoted to highlight the fact that cities, by providing education opportunities, can help people stay away from cutting down forests. Okay. So let's see what is the answer. Explain how urban areas help the environment. It's a very succinct way of putting what I just told you. Okay. So this is basically how urban areas, because of their employment opportunities, prevent people or wean away people from cutting trees and therefore saving the environment. Okay. Right. So we can infer that Calthrop's statement still jars with most people. So this is all dependent on the meaning of the word jar. By the way, I also told you this passage was slightly surprising. It says, cities, rather than having a bad impact, they prevent the deterioration of the environment. this is what is the surprising opinion of the author. And in the beginning, the author says this statement still jars with most people. Jarring, the meaning of the word jarring is something which you find shocking, right? So why would you find the author's argument shocking? Because most people think the opposite. So what is the opposite? That is option 1. That is option 1. Do not consider cities to be eco-friendly places. This is why when the author says the opposite, it would be jarring to most people. Right. Last question from the passages. This is the last question from the passage. What should be the okay? Let me just getting slightly difficult to read. So let me just read from the page which I have. Right. So which of the following statements would undermine the author's stand regarding the greenness of cities? So something, this may or may not be connected to the passage. The author says, he tells you which of the following statements would prove the author's argument wrong. They may or may not be from the paragraph. So it could be external. This is critical reasoning. You are going to weaken the author's argument, right? So look at one says the high density of cities leads to an increase in carbon dioxide and global warming. This is a negative impact of cities. The author was speaking about how cities do not have a negative impact on the environment. Option 1 is telling you the opposite of that. So this would this would be the weakness of the argument. Right. This would weaken the argument given by the author. This is enough to lead us to the answer. Right. Now, okay. So, next question. This question is something which is not easy. Not easy because, the connections are not very clearly visible, right? So it will be only done by hit and trial. In any case, if it is in the exam, I would suggest that people leave it, because it is, in any case, if you attempt it, right, you should attempt it only when you have excess time, when you have time which is extra. If you attempt it, get it right, you will get 3 marks, but it is something which will not invite negative marking. So by the way, if you have time, you can definitely, scribble anything, but the chances of getting it right would be very low. So what are the relations? Let's see, right? So adaptive behavior depends on cognitive economy, treating objects as equivalent, right? Now the only thing which I could find in this the whole paragraph was basically the connection between 2 and 4. What is it? The adaptive behavior depends on cognitive economy. What is cognitive economy? Treating objects as equivalent. So adaptive behavior depends on how we treat objects as equivalent to each other or to ourselves, right? Now, from this, if I say to categorize an object, this further takes up the concept of how do you recognize or treat the objects as equivalents. You can treat the objects as equivalents by categorizing it. Equivalent basically means similar to each other. This would basically mean categorizing. So that way 2 and 4 are connected. This is the only clue that is very clearly visible, right? Now, now if I look at 3, after this, the answer which they have provided is 2, 3, 4, 1, right? 2, 4, 3, 1, right? Now if I look at 3, the information we receive from our senses from the world typically has structure and order and is not arbitrary, right? So now another relation which I find is between 3 and 1. The information is not arbitrary, right? Meaning living things typically exhibit correlational structure. Not arbitrary, it is correlation. It has a properly well defined structure. Not arbitrary. And 1 says living beings, they exhibit correlational structure. These are the only 2 things, right? But this is a very, this is something which I would say you would be extremely lucky if you get it right, right? So we know 2, 4 and 3, 1 are connected. 2, 4 still can be connected, but 3 and 1 again difficult to relate with, right? So let's see. So summary question, right? So if you look at this question, can be done by elimination. If you quickly read it, Autapomorphy is basically a technical term. It means, something which is unique. In fact, even if I do not know the meaning of that, you can guess from the context. It's found only in a lineage and not shared. So that means it's something that is unique to a particular species. ठीक है, right? So he says language is unique to our species, right? Now it is also something which is developed over a period of time. It is complex, right? And it involves a lot of skills like cognition, right? It involves a lot of skills of cognition like memory. Okay, so that is basically the paragraph summary. Now if I look at the options, let's eliminate. Start from 4. Language is a distinctively human feature. Fine till here, but next part, as there is no evidence of the existence of, this is simply repeating the first part as the reason. It does not say anything about language is unique, fine, but what all is required to gather language, what is the process to develop it, is not at all discussed in 4. Eliminate 4 because of that. Look at 3. Language is not a single uniform entity, right? Fine, right? But the end result of a long and complex process of linguistic evolution. But this part does not at all, this part has a problem. The problem is the end result of a long and complex process of linguistic evolution. It does not give you anything about how language is critically, drawn on aspects of cognition, something like memory. How did it develop? It does not express very well about how it is developed. So if I have to choose between 3 and 4, if there's no other option, 3 would be still better. But let's see if there's a better option than that. Now if I look at 2, language, a trait derived trait found only. The problem is it derived? We do not know. Is it derived? It's a trait which is found in only humans. That's fine. So derived, a problem, has evolved over time and involves memory, right? But memory is only an example. It involves cognitive faculty. One of them is memory. So 2 can be eliminated. Choose between 1 and 3. If I choose between 1 and 3, you will find that both 1 and 3 do not contain the fact that language is unique, right? But 1 covers the other points better than 3. So that is why 1 is a better answer. So this is about which is the best answer rather than what is the correct answer here, right? So let's see. Next question is this. So this is where you are supposed to find out, this is supposed where you're supposed to find out the order again. Now this order, this question can be answered. This is something which can be answered, right? Why? The relations are very clearly visible. What are the relations? Something which you must have already discussed in parajumbles, right? Look at sentence 3. Historically, the notion of a balance of nature is part observational, part metaphysical, and not scientific in any way. This introduces the concept of balance of nature, right? Now after this, if I look at sentence 4 says it is an example of an ancient belief system called teleology. So the notion of the balance of nature is observed by 3 parts, right? And this fact is an example of something called teleology, right? Now the notion that what we call nature has a predetermined destiny associated with its component parts. One more clue that I will tell you is in sentence 2, these parts all fit. So straight away we know that 4 will be followed by 2, right? And the sentence 3 will be in the beginning. Now where do I place 1? Right, if you look at sentence 1, such a belief in the harmony of nature requires a purpose, presumably. So 1 is something which summarizes the whole thing, right? So the best answer should be 3, 4, which should be nothing else but 3, 4, 2, 1, right? Hope you are clear. So here the key is the parts and these parts. So the first key is 3, 4 followed by 2, and 3 a general statement which introduces, right? And sentence 1 which is like a summary that will like a commentary, like a running commentary on the whole thing, and that will be the last. So this is basically the 27th question. So this was the easiest, if not the easiest, this is something which was still attemptable, right? Let's look at the next question. Next question is 28. Okay, so find the odd one out. Now if you notice, this is not at all, if you look at the sentences, right? First sentence is about how plastic causes problems in the ocean, right? Because animals eat it, right? Sentence 2, it is about how, the component of ocean plastic, and the greatest component of ocean plastic is small size. So matlab, you are speaking more about what all are the various parts of ocean plastic. Are they big or are they small? Now if you look at it, 1 and 2 are very different things, right? So the answer will have to be between 1 and 2. Now look at the next sentence, that will decide the answer. Look at the next sentence, right? Next sentence tells you about how plastic endangers the life. It causes, harm to marine animals. This is what one was telling us also. So that basically means the answer will have to be 2. This is the easiest question so far. But just to confirm, if you look at 4 and 5, 4 and 5 are about the problems caused by plastic also, right? Again, a problems caused by plastic in oceans and ocean animals. And option 2 is not about the problem caused by plastic. It is about the largest proportion of ocean plastic falls in small size, meaning they are small. The pollutants are small. We are not talking about the size of the pollutants, but we are speaking about the impact that it has on the ocean, and it's negative. So the best answer is 2. So quickly, this is a question which we should have got correct. Okay, next question is 29. Okay, so again, a paragraph, right? A summary, right? Here, this summary, if you notice, this tells you about, how, office workers, nowadays open plan offices and cubicles. Nowadays you have open offices and cubicles rather than having demarcated rooms, right? So he's saying that the paragraph is of the opinion that it started off as in the beginning as a democratic kind of a objective to break down walls, but later on it became what it became, an object. It became something like it's a desire to pack in as many workers as they could, right? So it's to design an assembly, so it's to increase the efficiency, it's to increase the productivity, right? So that way the best answer is 1. If you notice, exploitation of labor, exploitation does not always mean harming. Exploitation definitely also means harnessing, right? So exploitation of labor could also mean making the most of labor. So if this is the case, the answer is 1, right? And when you say utopian, right, utopian inventors, when they invented, they thought of it with a very almost impossible, perfect kind of an ideology that was to break down, that was to encourage democracy, right? So that way the best answer is 1. Next, right, this is again slightly complex. You will find again this can be done more by elimination than anything else, right? So throughout, if you look at, eliminate the options, right? Post 991 studies show that people who are involved in people who are involved in non-anti-war movements are simply given as an example, not the main point. Eliminate 4. 3. Hybrid organizations attract individuals that are deeply involved in anti-war. Anti-war movements or non-anti-war movements are simply an example, right? So 3. Yes, it is about how hybrid organizations find it easier to attract, people from a diverse range of, society, from a diverse range of origins. So keeping that in mind, the best answer is 1. But this is something which can be done only by elimination. 1, you will not, if it is kept alone, you will not be able to say whether it is right or wrong. But eliminate karke, by elimination, the best answer is 1. So this was 30. Let's move on next. 31. What is the odd one out? If you notice, right now, if you look at it, sentence 2 contains it. Okay. It suggests that you should adopt an ancient rhetorical method favored by the likes, and it's about speaking to yourself in the third person. Now, if you notice, right, option 3 and 4 speaks about how simple rumination does not, rather than causing an advantage, gives you a disadvantage. Rumination basically means thinking about yourself, right? So simply ruminating may not be beneficial, right? Now, if you look at sentence 5, sentence 5 says the idea is that this small change in perspective can clear your emotional fog, allowing you to see past your biases, right? Now, this is something which explains what is given in 2. If you look at sentence 2 and sentence 5, 3 and 4 speak about how there's a research which says 3 and 4 not in that same order. It could be 4, 3 also, right? So it tells you how simply rumination may not be advantageous, right? But by making a slight change, it can be made advantageous. So all the sentences are connected except one, right? One is something which is totally different. Moving on, 32. So with 32, again, this is basically odd one out, finding the odd one out. What should be the answer? Okay, now if you notice, sentences 1, sentence 3, 4 and 5 are all connected. This is basically about how a particular interesting example of inference occurs in many single panel comics. So what is inference? Arriving at the conclusion which may not be exactly given there, and you do it on the basis of what is given to you, right? Now this exemplifies the whole point, right? So often the humor requires to imagine what happened in the instant. So it basically means, if you look at 3, 4 and 5, it's about how they devised a series of panels and has chosen to show you only one, right? So you're given access to only one and you are supposed to build on it. This is nothing else but inference, right? So if you look at it, 1, 3, 4 and 5 are connected. The answer that should be clear should be 2, right? So 2 is not at all connected to the answer, to the remaining sentences, right? So 2 is only about, how the creator participates, right? His imagination, that makes the kind of comic engaging. What makes it engaging is basically the fact that he shows you only one panel and he leaves it, he asks and encourages you to use your own imagination and infer and thereby derive the humor, right? So that is basically why the answer was that. Look at the next question, 33. This is again one of the easier questions. If you look at it, right, a very clear answer will emerge if you look at the options, right? See, if you look at sentence 4 and 1, sentence 4, clock time has been consistently. So this is basically about how when you measure time according to the clock, right, it is against feminism. It is basically a masculine approach, right? If I look at 1 now, conceptualization of women's time. So this is basically, it tells you how how feminist literature looks at it, the alternative, right? That way 4 and 1 are connected. Now if I look at 3, when the everyday practices of working soul fathers and working soul mothers are, it is found that it's often more focused on the clock than generally theorized. So that basically means this whole concept of quantifying work according to the clock is very well spread, right? Now, while dichotomies of men's time and caring, and this article argues, this sentence, the last sentence, is like an observation, and this observation is something which we should keep in the end. So the best answer here is 4132. So one of those questions which could have been correct, right? Now next question is also parajumble, and this was relatively easier. Let's see. Let's see. So what should be the answer, right? If you look at it, sentence 2 defines, or sentence 2 tells you nothing else but it introduces the concept. Sentence 2 introduces the concept, that is, what is atonality? Atonality is a condition of music in which the construct, so it describes the concept, right? Now in option 1 and sentence after 2, sentence 1, to the uninitiated listener, atonal music. So what is the effect of atonal music? So atonality is defined first, then the effect of atonal music is given in 1, right? Now after this, if I look at sentence 4, however, the word however means you are going to basically see, this is the impact, right? It might sound like something very bad, right? However, it is important. The word however means, despite sounding chaotic and random, it is one of the most important movements. So this is basically what is the impact of this word however. Once I found 2, 1 and 4, 3 definitely comes in the end, right? So the key here is this word, however, and the fact that 2 and 1 speak about introducing, 2 speaks about introducing atonality, and 1 speaks about how it looks negative, right? So this is the key to the answer. So that was CAT 2019, the second slot, English section. And as I was telling you, this will require you to have 2 skills. In fact, there are many. I'm looking at the most important skills. 1, to have a very good knowledge of Western idioms, Western language, especially American idiomatic language. And second, you will have to be very good in critical reasoning, right? So probably those who are preparing for CAT can definitely think of upgrading your skills in terms of adding these 2 skills, right? So that is it. Thank you everybody and have a nice day.